"I'll marry anyone but the human," declared the defiant alien princess. The crystal halls of the Valorian palace had never heard such a scream of fury. Princess Seraphine Velcora stood before her father's throne, her silver hair floating around her like living moonlight, her violet eyes burning with rage that made the courtiers step backward in fear. "You cannot be serious," she shouted, her voice echoing through the ancient chamber. Emperor Velcora remained seated on his throne of woven starlight, his expression calm despite his daughter's outburst. "The Galactic Council has decided," he said in his deep and measured voice. "The alliance with the Human Federation requires a bond of marriage, and you have been chosen." Seraphine felt her heart turn to ice. Human. They wanted her to marry a human. She had studied the species in her youth, as all Valorian nobles were required to learn about the lesser races of the galaxy, and everything she remembered filled her with disgust. Humans came from Earth, a brutal death world of extreme temperatures, violent weather, and predators that hunted in packs. And the humans themselves were no better than their savage planet. They lived barely a century if they were lucky. They could not sense psychic energy. They solved problems with violence instead of wisdom, and they bred like insects, spreading across the stars with no regard for the elegant balance of galactic civilization. "Father," Seraphine said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "I am the third daughter of the Valorian Empire, and I have 500 years of life ahead of me. So how can you ask me to bind myself to a creature who will wither and die before I even reach middle age?" "The humans have become important," her father replied, and she could hear the reluctance in his own voice. "They brokered peace between the Crocian horde and the militant collective, and they ended the resource wars of the Outer Rim. And now half the galaxy owes them favors. They are primitive," Seraphine shouted. "They are powerful," the Emperor corrected, "and power demands respect, whether we like it or not." Seraphine turned away from her father and walked to the great window that overlooked the capital city. Millions of Valorians lived below, their elegant forms moving through streets of crystal and light, their civilization stretching back over 10,000 years, and now they were expected to bow to humans. "Who is this human?" she asked without turning around. "His name is Park Junho," her father answered. "He is an ambassador and a former soldier, and he arrives tomorrow." "A soldier?" Seraphine repeated with contempt. "Of course they send a warrior, because that is all humans understand." She turned back to face her father, and her decision crystallized in her mind like ice forming on still water. "I will meet this human," she declared. "But I make this vow before the court and all who witness. I will marry anyone but the human, and no force in this galaxy will change my mind." The courtiers murmured among themselves, and the Emperor sighed heavily. But Seraphine had already made her choice. She would endure this insult, and she would send this Park Junho back to his primitive world in shame. The next day arrived faster than Seraphine wanted. She stood in the reception hall with her guards around her, wearing her finest gown of woven silver threads. Determined to show this human exactly what true nobility looked like, the doors opened, and she prepared herself to see a hulking brute, some scarred and violent creature who would confirm every terrible thing she believed about humanity. Instead, a man of average height walked calmly into the hall. Park Junho was not what she expected. He had black hair cut short and neat, warm brown eyes that seemed to carry a gentle light, and he moved with quiet confidence rather than aggressive swagger. He wore a simple dark uniform with no medals or decorations, and his hands were folded peacefully in front of him. "Princess Seraphine," he said, and his voice was soft and respectful. "Thank you for receiving me, and I apologize for any inconvenience this arrangement has caused you." She stared at him in surprise. He was apologizing? "You speak our language," she said, and she hated how her voice betrayed her shock. "I learned it over the past 3 months." Junho replied with a small smile. Your people have beautiful poetry, and I wanted to read it properly. Sarfine felt her eyes narrow with suspicion. This was clearly a trick. Some manipulation designed to lower her guard. I have already declared my intentions, she said coldly. I will not marry you. Human Junho nodded, as if this did not bother him at all. I heard about your declaration, he said calmly, and I respect your feelings completely. Then why are you here? She demanded. Because I believe in giving people chances, he answered. And I believe in showing rather than telling. He took a step forward, and her guards tensed. But he simply clasped his hands behind his back. I have a request, he said. Give me 30 days, and let me show you who I really am. And if you still wish me gone at the end of that time, I will withdraw my proposal myself and return to Earth. You would give up so easily? Seraphine asked with scorn. No, Junho replied. And something flickered in his gentle eyes. Something deeper and stronger than she expected. I would give up my pride. Because your happiness matters more than political treaties. Seraphine did not know what to say. No Valorian noble had ever spoken to her this way. 30 days, she finally said. And then you leave. Junho bowed his head respectfully. Thank you, Princess, as he was led away to his quarters. Seraphine watched him go with confusion churning in her chest. This was not how she expected things to begin. But it did not matter. She would break this human spirit long before 30 days passed. And she would prove to the entire galaxy that humanity had no place among the noble races. She was certain of her victory. She had never been more wrong about anything in her entire life. 20 days into the arrangement, Seraphine received orders to attend a diplomatic summit aboard the orbital station called Stella Crown. The gathering would bring together representatives from 30 different species, all meeting to discuss the future of the Galactic Alliance. Park Junho was required to attend as well, since the entire purpose of the summit was to celebrate the growing bond between the Valorian Empire and the human Federation. Seraphine found herself watching him during the shuttle ride to the station. He sat quietly by the window, gazing out at the stars with an expression of wonder that seemed almost childlike. Have you traveled much in space? She asked without meaning to. Junho turned to her with a gentle smile. I grew up on Earth, he said, in a small village in the mountains. I did not see the stars up close until I joined the military at 18. You were a soldier, Seraphine said, remembering what her father had told her. I was. Junho confirmed, and something shadowed crossed his face. I fought in the Terran border wars for 6 years. Why did you stop? Junho was quiet for a long moment. Because I learned that killing is easy, he finally answered. But healing the wounds that violence leaves behind takes a lifetime. And I decided I wanted to spend my years building instead of destroying. Seraphine did not know how to respond to such honesty. The summit began that evening with a grand banquet in the station's central hall. Hundreds of diplomats and nobles gathered beneath a dome of transparent crystal that showed the endless stars above. Seraphine wore her finest gown and her coldest expression, playing the role of reluctant bride that the galaxy expected. But her eyes kept finding Junho across the room. He moved among the alien delegates with easy grace, listening more than speaking, asking questions that showed genuine interest in each species and their culture. She watched a Croatian warrior, massive and covered in battle scars, laugh at something Junho said and clap him on the shoulder with enough force to knock a normal person down. Junho simply smiled and kept talking. How did he do that? She wondered. How did he make everyone feel comfortable around him? The answer came to her suddenly. He actually cared about them. It was not an act or a manipulation. He simply saw every person as worthy of respect. The realization disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. Halfway through the banquet, everything went wrong. The lights flickered and died, plunging the hall into darkness broken only by the starlight above Seraphine, felt a strange pressure in her mind. A psychic suppression field that made her thoughts turn slow and foggy. She heard screams and the sounds of fighting. "Protect the princess." Someone shouted. Her guards moved toward her. But dark figures emerged from the shadows, moving with deadly speed, the purest dominion. She realized with horror the extremist faction had been growing in power for years, preaching that humanity and other lesser species had no place in galactic civilization. They wanted to destroy the Alliance by killing its symbols, by killing her, and Junho blade flashed toward her face. She could not move fast enough. Her reflexes dulled by the psychic field. Then Junho was there. He moved like water becoming steel, flowing and then suddenly hard. And his hand caught the assassin's wrist while his other hand struck with brutal precision. The assassin crumpled. 3 more attackers converged on them. And Seraphine watched in stunned amazement as Junho transformed into something she had never expected. He was not elegant or graceful like a Valorian warrior. He was efficient. Every movement served a purpose. Every strike landed with devastating effect. And within seconds, 3 more assassins lay broken on the floor. "Stay behind me," he commanded, and his gentle voice had become iron. More attackers came, and Junho met them like a force of nature. Seraphine finally understood why humans were called Deathworlders. Was not because they were savage or primitive. It was because they had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. And they had learned to fight back with a ferocity that other species could not match. The psychic field made Valorian guards slow and confused. But Junho had no psychic abilities to suppress. He was fighting at full strength while everyone else struggled. A final assassin emerged from the darkness, his blade coated with something that gleamed sickly green poison. The assassin lunged at Seraphine, too fast for even Junho to intercept. But Junho did not try to intercept. He threw himself into the blade's path. The poisoned edge plunged into his side, and he gasped in pain. But his hands still moved, still fought, still found the assassin's throat and squeezed until the enemy went limp. Then Junho collapsed. "No." Seraphine screamed. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound as dark blood poured between her fingers. His eyes found hers, and somehow he was still trying to smile. "You are safe," he whispered. "You fool," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do that?" His hand reached up to touch her cheek, leaving a smear of his own blood against her silver skin. "You do not have to marry me," he said, his voice growing weaker. "Just live, princess. Just live a long and happy life." His eyes closed. "Healers." Seraphine screamed into the darkness. "Someone help him." And as she held his broken body against her chest, she finally understood the terrible truth. She did not want him to die. She could not bear the thought of a universe without Park Junho in it. Somewhere in the past 20 days, everything had changed. Then now she might lose him before she could tell him. The first week of the 30 days became a battlefield of elegant cruelty. Seraphine designed every moment to humiliate Park Junho, to expose him as the primitive creature she knew all humans to be. She invited him to formal dinners where the utensils numbered over 40 different pieces, each one requiring specific techniques that took Valorian children years to master. Junho failed spectacularly. He used the wrong fork for the opening course. He held his glass at the incorrect angle. And he committed a dozen other errors that made the noble guests whisper and laugh behind their delicate hands. But he did not grow angry or embarrassed. Instead, he laughed at himself, asked questions about each mistake, and thanked his hosts for their patience with genuine warmth. Seraphine watched him with growing frustration. Why would he not break? She arranged for him to attend a poetry recital, expecting his primitive human mind to find the complex verses boring and meaningless. Instead, Junho sat in perfect silence for 3 hours, and when the recital ended, He approached the poet with tears in his eyes. The verse about the dying star finding peace in darkness, he said in careful Valorian. It reminded me of my grandmother's last words to me, and I thank you for this gift. The poet, an ancient Valorian master who had performed for emperors, bowed deeply to the human and called him a soul of surprising depth. Seraphine wanted to scream. She tested him with music and art and philosophy, with games of strategy that required centuries of study to master, and he failed at all of them with such graceful humility that the very people meant to witness his shame began to admire him. Instead, he learns quickly, her handmaiden. Lyra commented one morning, he is manipulating everyone. Seraphine snapped back, but doubt had begun to grow in her heart like an unwanted seed on the 15th day. Everything changed. A plague swept through the lower districts of the capital. A sickness carried by contaminated water that the ancient pipes had failed to filter properly. The noble houses sealed their doors and looked away, because that was how Valorian society had always worked, with the high and the low separated by walls that neither side would ever cross. Seraphine was attending a garden party when she noticed Junho was missing. Where is the human? She asked a servant. He left early this morning, princess, the servant replied. He went down to the lower districts. Seraphine felt her blood turn cold. Not with concern for the human, she told herself, but with anger at his foolishness. She took a transport down to the lower city, a place she had never visited in her 200 years of life. What she found there broke something inside her. The medical camps were overflowing with sick and dying Valorians, citizens of the empire who had been abandoned by their own leaders. And in the middle of the chaos stood Park Junho, had removed his formal jacket and rolled up his sleeves. And he was carrying water to the sick, holding hands with the frightened, and helping the overwhelmed medical workers. However he could. Seraphine watched from the shadows as a small girl reached up to him with trembling hands. The child was clearly dying. Her silver skin turned gray, and her light fading from her eyes. Junho lifted her gently and sat down on a dirty cot, cradling her against his chest like she was the most precious thing in the universe. And then he began to sing. It was a human song, soft and slow and achingly sad, about a mother watching her child sleep and promising to protect them from all the darkness in the world. He sang in his own language, but somehow the meaning carried through. The dying girl smiled, her eyes closing peacefully, and she passed away in his arms with that smile still on her face. Junho held her for a long time, tears running silently down his cheeks. Then he gently laid her down, covered her with a clean cloth, and went back to helping the living. Seraphine fled. She returned to the palace and locked herself in her chambers, her mind spinning with confusion and something else, something that felt dangerously close to shame. How could this be? Humans were supposed to be violent and selfish and primitive. They were not supposed to weep for dying alien children they had never met. They were not supposed to work in plague camps while noble Valorians hid behind their crystal walls. That night, Seraphine could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Junho holding that little girl and singing her into peaceful death. She saw his tears falling without shame. She heard his voice, rough with grief, but still gentle. When morning came, she did not go to mock him or test him. She went to find him, still working in the medical camps, still helping however he could. You should rest, she said, and her voice came out softer than she intended. Junho looked up at her with exhausted eyes. There are still people who need help, he replied simply. Why do you care? Seraphine demanded. They are not your people, and this is not your world. Junho was quiet for a moment. My grandmother taught me that all people are my people, he finally said. She said that borders are lines on maps, but the compassion has no boundaries. He turned back to his work. You should return to the palace, princess, and I would not want you to become sick. Seraphine stood there watching him, And for the first time in 200 years, she did not know what to think or feel. The contempt that had defined her whole life was cracking apart, and something new and frightening was growing in its place. The healer said he should have died. The poison was designed to kill a Crocian warrior in seconds, and humans were supposed to be far more fragile than the massive reptilian soldiers. But Park Junho refused to die. He fought through 3 days of fever and agony, his human body battling the toxins with a stubbornness that left the Valorian medical staff in awe. His immune system is extraordinary, the chief healer told Seraphine. It is adapting to the poison in real time, creating new defenses we have never seen before. Will he live? Seraphine demanded. He should not, the healer admitted. But this human seemed determined to defy every prediction. On the 4th day, Junho opened his eyes. Seraphine was sitting beside his bed, where she had kept vigil for 72 hours without sleep. "Princess?" he whispered, his voice rough and weak. "You are an idiot," she said, and tears spilled down her cheeks despite her best efforts to stop them. Junho smiled that gentle smile she had grown to know so well. "I have been told this before. You threw yourself onto a poisoned blade for me," Seraphine continued, her voice shaking. "Why would you do something so foolish?" "Because it was the right thing to do," he answered simply. She wanted to shake him, to scream at him, to make him understand how much fear she had felt watching him fall. Instead, she just held his hand and let herself cry. The days that followed were different than before. Safans visited Junho every morning in the recovery ward, bringing him books of Valorian poetry and sitting beside him while he healed. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood in the mountains of Korea, where his grandmother had raised him after his parents died in an accident. He told her about the old woman who had taught him to read, to cook, to see beauty in simple things. She used to say that strength without kindness is just cruelty in disguise, Junho said one afternoon, and that the measure of a person is not how they treat their equals, but how they treat those who cannot fight back. She sounds like a wise woman, Seraphine replied. She was the best person I have ever known. Junho grew stronger each day, and soon he could walk through the palace gardens with Seraphine at his side. The courtiers whispered about them, and the news networks broadcast stories about the human hero who had saved the Valorian princess. Her father summoned her on the 28th day. "The galaxy is calling for the marriage to proceed immediately," the emperor said. "The attack has made the alliance more popular than ever, and Junho's heroism has changed how many species view humanity." "I know," Seraphine said quietly. "You should agree to the wedding while public sentiment is favorable," her father continued. "This is the perfect opportunity." Something inside Seraphine snapped. "Is that all you see?" she demanded. "An opportunity for political gain?" The emperor blinked in surprise. "Seraphine, he almost died for me, father," she shouted. "He threw away his life without hesitation, and you want to use his heroism as propaganda." She stormed out of the throne room before her father could respond. She found Junho in the gardens, sitting on a bench beneath a tree that bloomed with flowers of pure light. He looked up at her approach, and his expression shifted to concern when he saw her face. "What is wrong?" he asked. "Everything," Seraphine shouted, pacing back and forth in front of him. "My father wants to announce our wedding immediately, to take advantage of your heroism, to use what you did as a tool for politics." Junho was quiet for a moment. "And this upsets you?" "Of course it upsets me," she said, whirling to face him. "You deserve better than to be used as a piece in their games." She stopped, breathing hard, suddenly aware of what she had just admitted. She cared about what he deserved. She cared about him. Junho stood slowly, still weak from his injuries, and walked to stand before her. "I told you when I arrived," he said gently. "I will withdraw if you wish. and I meant those words then. And I mean them now. Is that what you want? Seraphine asked, and her voice came out small and frightened. Do you want to leave? Junho raised his hand and gently brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. I want whatever makes you happy, he said. I never came here to trap you or to force you into anything. And if you want me gone, I will go. And if I want you to stay? The words escaped before she could stop them. Junho's eyes widened slightly. Then I will stay, he said quietly. For as long as you want me. Seraphine looked into his warm brown eyes, and she saw no deception there, no manipulation, no hidden agenda. She saw only a man who'd given everything. He had and asked for nothing in return. Tomorrow is the 30th day, she said. I know. The Galactic Council expects an answer. I know. Seraphine took a deep breath. Then I will give them one, she said. But it will be my answer, not my father's, not the council's, and not anyone else's. She turned and walked back toward the palace, her heart pounding with a decision that would change everything behind her. Junho watched her go with hope blooming in his chest for the first time since he had arrived on this world of crystal and starlight. The Grand Throne Hall had never been so full. Representatives from over 100 species filled the massive chamber, their eyes fixed on the crystal throne where Emperor Velcora sat in solemn silence. Cameras from every major news network in the galaxy broadcast the moment to trillions of viewers. Across known space, everyone was waiting for Princess Seraphine's answer. She stood at the base of the throne, wearing a gown of midnight blue that sparkled with embedded stars, her silver hair flowing like liquid moonlight down her back. 30 days ago, she had stood in this same hall and declared that she would marry anyone but the human. Now the galaxy held its breath to hear what she would say. Park Junho stood across the hall with the other human delegates, his formal uniform crisp and neat, his expression calm despite the weight of the moment. Their eyes met across the crowded chamber. He gave her a small nod, and somehow that tiny gesture filled her with courage. Princess Seraphine Velcora, her father intoned, his voice amplified to fill every corner of the hall. You have been offered a marriage alliance with Ambassador Park Junho of the Human Federation, and the 30 days of consideration have passed. So what is your answer? Seraphine looked out at the assembled crowd. She saw Valorian nobles who expected her to reject the human and preserve their sense of superiority. She saw alien delegates who wondered if peace between species was truly possible. She saw the representatives of the purest dominion, those who had tried to kill her, watching with hatred in their eyes, and she saw Junho standing quiet and patient, ready to accept whatever she decided with the same gentle grace he had shown since the day they met. She took a deep breath. 30 days ago, she began, her voice ringing clear through the hall. I stood in this chamber and made a declaration, and I said that I would marry anyone but the human. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I said those words because I believed what I had been taught, Seraphine continued. I believed that humans were primitive and violent, that they were beneath us, that they had nothing to offer our ancient and noble civilization. She paused, letting her words sink in. I was wrong. The murmurs became gasps. In the past 30 days, Seraphine said, her voice growing stronger, I have watched Park Junho fail every test of Valorian refinement with humility and good humor. And I have seen him study our art and poetry with genuine love and respect. She turned to look at her father. I have seen him work in plague camps among our own people, holding dying children in his arms while our noble houses hid behind their walls. Emperor Velcora's expression flickered with something that might have been shame. I have watched him throw himself onto a poisoned blade to save my life, Seraphine declared, her voice rising with emotion. Without hesitation, without calculation, without any thought for himself, she turned back to the crowd. And now there were tears in her violet eyes. And when I asked him why, do you know what he said? She pointed at Junho across the hall. He said it was the right thing to do, and he meant it. And that is something I have never seen from any Valorian noble in 200 years of life. The hall erupted in chaos. Some cheered, some shouted in outrage, and the purest delegates rose from their seats with fury twisting their faces. This is an insult to our civilization. One of them screamed, "Humanity is a plague upon the galaxy." "No," Seraphine said, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade of ice. "Humanity is a mirror, and when we look at them, we see everything we have forgotten about ourselves." She walked forward, through the crowd, toward where Junho stood frozen in amazement. "Humans live short lives," she said, "but they fill those years with more meaning than we manage in centuries, and they love fiercely, and they fight for what they believe in, and they never, ever give up." She stopped in front of Junho and looked up into his warm brown eyes. "I said I would marry anyone but the human," she declared, a voice carrying to every corner of the hall and to every broadcast in the galaxy. "But I was a fool, and I was blind. And I was wrong." She reached out and took his hand. "I will marry only the human," she announced. "Not because of treaties, not because of politics, not because my father or the Galactic Council demands it, but because Par Junho has shown me what true nobility looks like." Junho stared at her with tears gathering in his eyes. "Princess," he whispered, "you do not have to do this." "I know," Seraphine smiled through her own tears. "That is why I am choosing to." She turned to face the crowd one final time. "To those who oppose this union," she declared, "to the purest dominion and all who share their hatred, I have only this to say. The old ways are dying and a new era is being born. And you can either join us in building something beautiful, or you can be left behind." The purest delegates stormed out of the hall, but as they left, something remarkable happened at Croshen. Warrior stood and slammed his fist against his chest in salute. Then a militant collective commander rose and bowed. Deeply one by one, representatives from dozens of species stood too. Honored the princess who had chosen love over prejudice and hope over fear. Emperor Velcora descended from his throne and approached his daughter. "You have changed everything," he said quietly. "I know," Seraphine replied. "Is that not what every daughter should do?" Her father looked at Junho for a long moment, then extended his hand in the human custom. "Welcome to the family." Issei Junho shook his hand with a smile. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, beneath the light of 3 moons, with the entire galaxy watching as they exchanged vows. Junho leaned close to whisper in her ear, "You did not have to choose me." Seraphine smiled and pressed her forehead against his. "I know," she whispered back. "That is why I did." And somewhere across the stars, in villages and cities and ships sailing through the endless void, trillions of beings watched a human and a Valorian princes begin their life together. It was the start of something. No, it was the start of everything, and it all began because one stubborn princess had been brave enough to admit she was wrong.